Good morning, everyone. This is the start of a regular meeting, December 5th. We'll start with public comment. It looks like there's no one from the public here, so we'll skip agenda item 1. Agenda item 2, before I launch that, I just want to make sure, did everybody get my email? So what we're going to do is kind of how we're going to try to orchestrate this, just so we can have a level of efficiency and organization based on the fact that we have discussed this topic a couple of times in the past, both September 26th and July 18th. We are going to, so the only item on the agenda is the TSP, and there are 34 recommended revisions to the draft local TSP, and those revisions are what you received in the AIS, and they are directly in response to our comments from the prior meetings, as well as some neighborhood responses. Staff will go over kind of that summary. So the list is organized into 6 topics, and because we've previously discussed these items, the way I'm recommending approaching this is that let's only talk about the items, the revision items that you would like to have discussion, either edit, modify, you have questions. Other than that, we will skip any of the other items, assuming that nobody has issues with them. So we'll do it category by category. So we'll start with the first category. We'll find out who has any comments, further discussions for the various items. And then what I think we're going to do is with each item, we'll go ahead and do essentially a straw poll vote, and then at the end be able to then craft a motion that reflects our prior discussions as well as today's. Does that make sense? And yeah.
I just have a question. I only got it electronically, and I didn't see how it was. I mean, I just saw the 34 things. I didn't see where you said it was broken into 6 categories.
So the categories are the bold. So the first category changes to project lists, street classifications, and maps. And that's on page 4 of the PC agenda.
And then the next one's revisions regarding Vision Zero.
I'm looking. I'm just looking, so.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, so,
There it
okay,
is.
all right,
So
yeah,
that's
okay,
the
all right.
first category.
Okay.
So what I'll do, I have a printout here, Commissioner Mills, if you want to take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're going to move through the meeting with those parameters. And I also wanted to let you know that I think what I'm going to start doing just with Envision Eugene is kind of have a similar way of establishing kind of a way the meeting can run efficiently beforehand. And so that we can have that cleared up and not necessarily spend the time, because we have a lot of work to do this next year. So, staff.
Yeah, come on, guys. Good morning. Rob Erfeld, Transportation Planning Manager. I don't think I have much to say. I think Kristen said about 90% of it, so thank you.
Okay.
We were last here in September, and I think before that in July, and the public hearing was in June. And we heard a lot of feedback, and there was a pretty robust discussion at the September work session. And so I think you'll see that there's been changes made or additions to the 34 that reflect a lot of the comments we heard from you. Since then, I think we had met with, and Commissioner Jaworski would remember this, but we had met with Northeast Neighbors, was it just before or just after the last work session?
October 5th, I believe.
Okay, so it was after. So I went to their general meeting that was focused on transportation, got some feedback there, and then met with a joint transportation committee of River Road and Santa Clara neighborhood associations after that, and got feedback from them. And I also went back through the formal comments we had received from all 3 of those neighborhood organizations, as well as other public comments we had received to see to what extent we could update this list to reflect that. So think that's it. Is there anything you'd want to add, Catherine?
No, did you want to give a couple of examples? So
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
just a couple of examples of some of the things that we heard at your last work session on this, and so what you can see in here from just the organizational, from the putting the definitions up front. Those were in there, but they were at the end, so we moved those, the proposed revision to move those up front. The addition of a project specifically for traffic calming with designated funds for that. So what you see now is these 34 incorporate all of the ones that you saw at the last meeting, some of those revised, additional ones that were discussed by you and requested by you, and some clarifications as well. So that is the additional information was specifically requested around level of service. That's all added. The other thing we heard fairly clearly was that when it comes to changes that you would be recommending to the draft, you wanted to see them. So last time you had in front of you some of the revisions that said, you know, revise the LCDC approved benchmarks to be consistent with DLCD's comments. And what we heard from you fairly clearly was, no, we want to see what you plan to do, that you were not comfortable just making a recommendation that included us going forward with that revision. So now you'll see none of the proposed revisions are staff go forth and do this. They're all very specifically articulated out, explicitly what the changes look like, what you're being asked to approve as a recommended revision.
Thank you.
Are there any commissioners that have direct questions right now for staff based on what they just have said? No? Okay. Commissioner Jaworski?
Yeah, I would assume that other than the 34 items listed here, nothing else is changing in this.
That's mostly true, except that, like, there's a section where it says the number of percentage of the funding that's recommended for different categories, or the number of projects, so that's going to we'll have to change that to make sure it's consistent with the changes to the project list. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So it'll, just so that the plan's internally consistent.
Okay, and then the second question, because I couldn't find a relevance to it before we get into it. In our handout on ACIS on page 10, you have the corridor overview map. Why is that in there? I'm trying to figure out why you put that there.
So Appendix F of the current transportation system plan, which is Volume 2 that has the appendix in it. Appendix F is are the transportation corridors that is referenced it's the transit corridors that is referenced and discussed in the transportation system plan. And there was some public comment received that the map that was included in Appendix F was actually different than all the other maps that are being relied on for that same topic, for these transportation corridors within that area. And so we went and we looked, and that was accurate. So for consistency, that would be the replacement for Appendix F, which is another map. It's the moving ahead map.
So if anyone has questions on this, which category would it fall under of the six?
That's a good question.
It is,
It's listed.
it's referenced under,
It's category 1.
it's number 16 under Category 1. Replace Appendix F with the map of key corridors that is being used in
Okay,
other
thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So let's start with the first category, changes to project lists, street classifications and maps. So are there particular revision items that Planning Commission would like to discuss? Commissioner Mills, and then Commissioner Borowski,
Yeah,
and Commissioner Jaworski.
I have two questions. I'll start with my second question and then let some other folks have a crack. This first one is, I think, pretty simple. It's on modification number 10, the first bullet. And I'm curious as to what brought about the word change. Maybe it's something I should remember, but don't.
That was feedback we received from the River Road Santa Clara folks, that Northwest Expressway doesn't really have a lot of viability as a freight corridor because of the connections, what it connects to, and that they think what's important from the TSP perspective is encouraging more drivers to use Northwest Expressway as a way to access those neighborhoods as an alternative to River Road to relieve the traffic on River Road.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski and then Commissioner Jaworski.
I have a few. On number 3, projects added. The West First Sidewalk, North Side, Seneca to Bertelson, estimate $311,000. Will property owners be assessed for those, or is that going to be taken care of by the city?
Excuse me, that's to be determined. We don't, historically, sidewalks have been filled in through redevelopment or through sidewalk infill programs. And so when redevelopment happens, it's just, the city requires the developers to build the sidewalk. We haven't determined how we're going to build sidewalk in the future in Eugene.
So what is the 311 for?
That's the cost of the project.
That's the cost of putting sidewalks there.
We're not presuming how it will be paid for. So the cost of the sidewalks is part of the plan, like for all sidewalk projects in here.
Yeah,
Wait, let me just be clear though, for sidewalk projects in here that are on streets that are already improved, by which I
Right.
mean they already have curb and gutter,
Right.
then it's just part of the budget of the TSP. If it's an urban standards project where it's currently not an improved street, then we're assuming that some of that sidewalk will be paid for through the assessment to the property owner.
Okay, yeah, that was kind of some of my, gets to some of my questions, because it was also there on 8. So on, that answers number 3. On number 8, we have projected bicycle lane from Hilliard Street to Alder Street on East Broadway. Are you really considering putting a bicycle lane on East Broadway on that section?
So the idea would be to make it so there's only one lane. Currently, there's 2 lanes from westbound Broadway to northbound Hilliard. Okay?
Okay,
So the idea would be to take one of those lanes out and repurpose it as a bicycle facility. So there'd only be one lane. We feel that there's one lane is adequate for the volume that's making that right turn there. From westbound.
walk me through that. So Broadway, that's,
So Franklin turns into Broadway around around Alder, okay?
right,
And then you pass Alder Street,
Right.
and then all of a sudden, there's these 2 right turn only lanes that are added.
Right.
To go to northbound Hilliard. So the idea would be there will only be one right turn lane for vehicles, and we would have one for bikes. And the idea would be to take the 2-way bike facility on Alder and actually have it go around the curve there.
is there not enough right-of-way to put that up on and keep the lanes?
Well, the other thing, and it's not reflected in the TSP yet because it's more of an emerging issue, is that we're talking about making Hilliard a 2-way street in the courthouse district. So there wouldn't be a whole lot of purpose it's just not a very busy street to feed 2 lanes into it. It was overbuilt.
It's not it's,
The turning movement from westbound Broadway to northbound, I don't have the numbers on me,
Right,
but
right.
it's just not
that go around and circle around by the credit union there.
Right. Yep. So the other thing you'll see in here is we had a project to build an undercrossing, to basically take the Alder Street facility and have it build a new undercrossing underneath the railroad tracks to connect to the riverbank path. That used to be on the 20-year list. We've moved that to the beyond 20-year list. We don't think it's as important as we used to, based on discussion and feedback from the community and just some of the challenges you have with undercrossings around drainage and people hanging out there and that sort of thing. And so these 2 projects we're basically saying, let's make these more of a priority. They're more cost effective and deprioritize the undercrossing.
Okay, so that gets me then to the number 9. I wanted an explanation why we were taking the railroad crossing off.
Right. So we're moving it to beyond 20-year list.
And again, give me the rationalization.
Well,
Well,
I'll tell you.
let me back up. So for me, that area in there, right now, there's not a lot of use on it, but there's kind of some little plans that are made to be doing a lot of stuff on that EWEB property, and you don't.
right, so the at-grade crossing at 8th is going to stay where it is, and so it's really not that far well, actually, it's not, that'll line, we're not going to be moving it further north, like we have previously, to line up with 8th. It's going to stay where it is.
Okay.
It's not that far from there. The Alder Street undercrossing was originally conceived when the Oregon Research Institute was going to go on that site north of there. At this point, the university says they have no plans to develop that site. So there's really nothing to connect to in there. Then there's also a project in the TSP to create a path in front of the Louise Village property, basically to have a path all the way along there. So we feel like there's not, if we build that other project, we'll have a good connection to the crossing at 8th, at 8th and Hilliard, and then the existing crossing, and then, which will be enhanced through the courthouse, through the E-Web improvements.
Redevelopment.
And then we're going to make the path along Franklin better.
Okay.
It's currently a substandard sidewalk that'll connect to the Frohnmayer Bridge. So there's not a whole lot to get to. It's from a cost benefit
Right.
perspective to build a $3.5 million undercrossing just to get to the old pole yard. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, all right. That answers that for me. Let me see where my next ones are in the other ones.
Commissioner Jaworski, and then Commissioner Nicolello, and then Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, I have two on number 13. I'm still confused upon development. I know that our neighborhood indicated on the UD4 project in Table 5.3, which is referenced as a table here, and I know that Santa Clara also, if we look at the July 18th, page 27 of the AIS there, they questioned this thing about what does it mean and about upon development when some of the streets are fully developed, or in the case of UD4, the entire proposed street is fully developed except for one lot, which we know won't be developed for 20-plus years. So that I don't understand that, why it's still there. And then you're changing a priority and saying that if it includes streets that are primarily aligned with single-family residential development, it has a priority. So you're saying two things in that section under 13.
Well, first of all, we're proposing to move UD, if you go to number 6, we're proposing to move UD4 to the projects to be completed, to the roadway, to just the multimodal project list. So that would no longer be in the upon development section. And so reflecting that that's a priority, that project's a priority for the neighborhood, that development of the school district parcel could be decades off. So that's, I don't know if that helps at all, but that,
So in number 6, I didn't understand number 6 because it goes to a different, okay, so what I have a question on is moving, that you're saying number 6, because it says revised to indicate that the project might extend across County Farm and to connect Parkview and Parkview Drive. Okay?
but we're also proposing to move it from the upon development list to the list of projects to be completed within 20 years.
So then it wouldn't have to wait for development.
Yeah, but what it references here, when I read that, I didn't get what you just said, which is fantastic if I understood that. When I read that, revised project on number 6 to indicate that the project might extend west across county and country farm roads to connect Parkview Drive. That's
Right.
that section afterwards.
So read the first part of number 6.
Right, but are you changing UD?
Move upon development project UD4 spectrum from table 5.3, projects to complete it to table 5.1, modal transit be completed within 20 years. Okay.
I think
Boy.
that second sentence is just adding to. the
Okay, I got
description.
confused on that.
Is that what
Okay.
I'm
Right,
understanding?
because there was some contention at the Northeast Neighbors meeting about people for and against extending that
For that second part.
to across Coburg and County Farm roads. And so that's why it says to indicate the project might, just to, because that's what public involvement's for.
I understand
And that's-
that you even said at the meeting you would go out and talk to those
Right.
2 or 3 people that seem to have an objection.
So does that answer your concerns?
That answers, that's good for 13. 16, which is why you said it applied to 16. When I look at that overview map, and it's only because Moving Ahead came out to our area, they published a lot of maps, and I know that when one looks at transit corridors and then Moving Ahead maps, sometimes they're different. Now, this map is different than what was presented at our neighborhood and what I've seen in Moving Ahead. The one in Moving Ahead showed options that would go all the way up to Crescent, turn right, and then head out to Game Farm for further loops. This doesn't include that, so I don't want to have a map take precedent over what's been so far presented unless there's been changes by moving ahead.
It's really supposed to be, Appendix F really is just kind of illustrative. It's really just supposed to give, and there will be that typical flagging, like this is not, that's included in your current Appendix F, that's like, this isn't locking it in. It's just supposed to be a general demonstration of the approximate areas that we're talking about. But if you, the way it's referred to once in transplant, in your TSP, in the draft local TSP, theoretically, it could just come out. But it provides kind of, because they're described generally.
Then over to Game Farm, and then they indicated that that was an option, and they were looking at that because we even talked about the transit station right there.
Right. But I think they're also, this is showing an option that will go to Crescent and make a right on Shadowview and left on Shad Drive, and my understanding is that's still under consideration too.
Well, this doesn't show any of that. It
Right,
just-
I believe it does. That's why where it jogs down, it's going from Crescent down Shadowview to Chad. That's what that little zig is there.
It just doesn't have the name of the street.
Right, it doesn't have the name of Crescent on it.
Would it be,
Oh, you're saying that this map is showing that jog. Sorry, then if the map is, it was confusing to me.
Lello and then Commissioner Mills.
So first, just want to say thank you to staff. You definitely with all the feedback we gave you the last time, and we gave you a lot, so thank you so much. And you obviously did a lot of outreach. I just wanted to check in on number 10, just because it was brought up about replacing the word freight with the word vehicle for the Northwest Expressway project. I understand that the Neighborhood Association Joint Committee wanted to change that a little bit, but did you get a chance to check in with any of the freight companies on their thoughts on that? I understand that we want to have a very balanced street, of course, that it supports all modes, but just, as it is traditionally, I think, a freight corridor.
Keep in mind, B2 is beyond 20 years.
Okay.
So this is really out in the future.
Okay.
We had a hard time engaging the freight industry in general, so
That's good to
we
know.
didn't talk with them about this change in particular, but I think given that this is something out in the
Yeah.
future, and
So long.
we
term.
would definitely be engaging those folks, so.
That's really good to know for the future work that we do on the RTP, that it is difficult to engage them at times. My other two questions are about some of the projects that Commissioner Borowski touched on, and I want to say I'm really excited to see a lot of the bike projects that are in here, and to see that our network slowly being completed. As a cyclist who had to get around in that area, I can tell you that sometimes it's a little bit interesting. And requires a little bit of ingenuity. So some of these I'm really excited about. Quick question about number 9, about the Alder Street rail crossing, just to address some of those concerns, because that is a priority area considering the EWEP redevelopment project, and then also too just the Franklin corridor in general, considering Laveau's thoughts moving ahead with their science complex. That's going to hopefully become much more of a sustainable multimodal corridor, and the connections across the river. Is that a project that could become required of a developer when that property is eventually developed?
Undercrossing?
Yes,
Probably not.
probably not.
I mean, I don't think that we would, the nexus between the impacts on the transportation system and a $3.5 million undercrossing is just not there.
yeah, I mean, it really would depend on specifically what impact they're having to the system that would necessitate something like this. But moving it from the 20 years, within 20 years to beyond 20 years, doesn't, I mean, that's like an internal prioritization of where we're looking at. It certainly wouldn't prevent, if the need all of a sudden arose that this project became very important because of something that was happening down on the EWEB riverfront, nothing would prevent it from happening
There's no plan.
earlier. It's just, we have to have some balance. If we've got everything within 20 years, our wish list becomes too long. But when it comes to development requiring any transportation or other type of improvements, going to depend on the type of impact they're having on them.
And then one more quick question. Just checking in on the 13th Avenue cycle track, which I'm really excited to hopefully see come to fruition soon. That estimated cost is 3.28 million. I think when I last checked in on that project, it was about $1 million. I might be mistaken. But could you kind of just discuss about what some of the costs are built into that?
$1 million, right, okay.
With one more question, if you let me tack on a sub one to that. Since that is kind of a bit of a price tag, is there any possibility of doing phasing? And really, that idea of phasing can apply to a lot of these projects.
Well, I'll give you the punchline first, which is that the project's pretty much funded.
Okay.
Because there's,
That's great.
we're going to be receiving a grant from ODOT. I mean, it hasn't been 100% officially approved yet, but we'll be getting a grant of about 2.6 million from ODOT.
Wow.
So the change in the cost estimate just reflects us doing more detailed cost estimating, and the major cost of the project is replacing most of the traffic signals in the corridor.
Yeah. Okay, so that's still the same.
Does that answer all your questions?
That does, though I will actually apply my question about phasing to a lot of those bicycle projects because those are pretty hefty tags for a lot
Right.
of them. Is that, I mean, is there, I think that that's a question that came up a lot, especially too when I was going to some of the Sustainability Commission meetings and some of their subcommittee meetings about this idea of phasing and how we can fund these projects. And so is that something that would be addressed perhaps in an action plan?
I mean, we look at that all the time. So when we're applying for funding for projects, that's something we think about. So as an example, the High Street two-way protected bikeway, we recently applied for a grant to build what we called phase one from where the Amazon path ends at 19th Avenue up to 13th to connect to the future two-way protected bikeway there. That grant was not funded, but that's just an example of how we were looking at phasing a project. Because for that particular grant through ODOT, we thought if we applied for the whole amount, we'd have even a lesser chance of getting funded. Now, through that process, we got another project in the plan funded, which has a new cost estimate, which is the Roosevelt Boulevard path under number 10, it's PB 610. And so we revised that cost estimate there also to reflect the more detailed cost estimating that was done for that grant program.
Excellent, thank you.
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, I've got a question on item 20, and I think it's more a matter of grammar or
Can
wording.
I ask you a favor? It's in the next category.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no
Then I've got a
worries.
question on number 15.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry. And that is add a new project to Table 5.5 to analyze options to address congestion and local connectivity needs in the vicinity of Coburg Road Beltline Highway interchange. And I feel like that's too vague of a, I don't quite understand the vicinity of what that means.
Well, first of all, that project was put in at the request of Northeast Neighbors. Secondly, a study project, there's issues with delay in not just at that interchange, but at nearby intersections.
That's my-
So vicinity means kind of in that area, looking at, what can we do? Because when you're looking at fixing things in interchange, you might look more broadly.
Well, I guess you just restated my concern, because it does say in the vicinity can mean in the area, and I get that. We're
Yeah.
not just looking at the signalization of the interchange itself. We are looking at the area, and I guess I'm wondering if, does that mean up to Crescent and down to, the next signal, or I guess I'm just feeling like it's a little vague there. I think that's what you're going to end up doing.
We
And-
haven't scoped the study yet. I mean, that would be part of the process of scoping the study, would be to say, hey, where's the problem here? How far out does it go? What do we need to look at? So that's why, I think vicinity is a good word, because it just gives you a sense of focus on that area, but.
Okay.
And so,
Could mean 20 miles.
Too ambitious.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind with that one is it's purely analyzing options. So obviously, it's context of what the actual scope is of that item. I don't know if that helps, Commissioner Mills. Any other questions for this section? So I'm just going to get a straw vote. At this point, it seems like the revision items, how many in favor of voting in favor of all the proposed revision items in category 1? Okay, unanimous. Okay, we'll go to category 2. And I'm going to put Commissioner Mills in line first.
Thank you.
Number 20.
Madam Chairman. It's a wording issue around number 20, and I'll just read the last sentence. It says, "In furtherance of the City Council's adopted Vision Zero Goal Resolution 5143, prioritize safety improvements over people who walk, bike, and use mobility devices because no loss of life versus serious injury on our streets is acceptable." I'm thinking the word prioritize is too vague. Prioritize could assign a lower priority or a higher priority, and versus what? I think you're trying to say here you want to assign the highest priority to these categories above vehicles, motor vehicles, and I think you should just say that.
Certainly, we can change this. If you have, so right now, if in furtherance of the city's adopted Vision Zero goal,
I guess I would say it feels purposefully vague, the way it's written right now.
Are there any suggestions for how to word that?
You just say it?
Am I allowed to
Commissioner
ask that?
Nicolella. You sure?
I don't know if I have a wording suggestion, but maybe just to kind of help parse through this a little bit. I serve on the board of directors of Betty Eugene Springfield Transit, who was the organization who brought this forward to the city council, and they adopted it last year. And one of the points about Vision Zero that's really important is that it's to make safety improvements for those who walk, bike, and use mobility devices. It's meant to have equitable streets, but drivers are a part of that because drivers also use our system, and drivers benefit as well when, we have safety improvements for those folks. And so I would say, just not to speak for that board, but I would say personally, I think that this language provides that proper nuance because everyone benefits from those, and I don't think that we would want the language to read, prioritize safety improvements for these folks over improving, vehicular improvements, because it all works towards creating this cohesive system in which education, engineering, and I'm forgetting my third E right now because I'm doing this on the fly. Someone knows it in the audience, I'm sure. But education, engineering, and enforcement all work together to kind of create that balance. I don't know if that was helpful at all, but
I guess I would offer that there would only be a balance if it included motor vehicles in this statement.
So I guess the question is it sounds like you were saying, do you agree that the word prioritize is the same thing as saying make this a priority?
To me, prioritize is a word which can assign a priority to an item. And it could be a higher priority or a lower priority.
Okay.
if we said, so how about, and this I think also reflects Bree's discussion, in furtherance of the City Council's adopted Vision Zero Goal, Resolution number 5143, make a priority safety improvements. Is that, is the term?
High priority.
Make
does assigning a value to it help?
or make safety improvements for people who walk, bike, and use mobility devices a top priority or a high priority
Yeah.
because no.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you how I read this. To me, as it reads now, to me, it's somewhat purposefully vague, but it's intended to say that these modes, other modes, should receive a higher priority in the future than they have in the past. That's the way I read this. Okay, but I'm not sure that everybody's going to read it that way. And to me, it's like, I'll just say, I don't want to beat a dead horse. It feels a little vague to me here. So I'm not sure I have the wording for you because I have my own predisposition on this, and I know we're shooting for balance here.
Right.
And I guess that's my comment. I think given what Bree has suggested, I think she has probably the best background in terms of what the intent was here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going back to the word that I think you used, which was balance. Was that a word
Yeah.
you used? And so, and I agree wholeheartedly with that, but for this to be balanced, it should say motor vehicle too. But then it tends to, then it also changes the inference that these should receive higher priority. So I think what you're, I'll leave it. You can choose to leave it. I just feel like it's somewhat vague.
Well, what we would hope to get from you today is, is this discussion and then a proposed change. And so then we can discuss that. But what I think, to try to help you move this and so you don't feel like you're having endless discussions about just revising the language where we come back and throw our words at you. If there's a way that you want this to change, please propose it, and then we can discuss that. But I think what we're going to run into is, if we continue to revise it, we probably aren't going to get to
Everybody's going to want
where you want it.
endless change.
So can I, Commissioner Mills, is it all right if I have Commissioner Nicolello think about this a minute? Like you said, having her have the background, think of a word, or do you have a question? What is?
Well, I'm hesitant to change that, and I know it's just a word, but words are important. I think that if this might put you at ease, this language was one used from the actual resolution itself that was adopted by City Council, so there is precedent there. But it's also very similar to language used in other cities throughout the country, and I understand that, to an extent you can't quite apply all of that here. But generally speaking, this is kind of the language that has been used to describe this policy. Eugene is part of a national network of Vision Zero cities, and so there is consistency even on a national scale too. But I would also tack onto that and say that there actually is a little bit of vagueness to this as well, because there is going to be a Vision Zero action plan that's going to come forward in July 2017, and that'll also provide a lot more targeted objectives and things like that. And so really what you're seeing here is just, and you can see in the language, consider safety first, strive for zero transportation related fatalities, prioritize safety improvements for those, for people who walk, bike, and use mobility devices. And so I think that language, I would say personally that I'm comfortable with it. And I haven't heard from too many people with issues about it. I think generally I've heard that people have been able to understand it. But, if you still want to change that word, I can definitely start jotting down some suggestions if you want.
I'll move forward and you can contemplate that.
Sure.
Commissioner Randall and then Commissioner Jaworski.
Well, I got a question that gets,
can I
wait,
let-
no.
Oh, go ahead.
The question is how we're running this. If a commissioner has a question that brings a discussion, it's only been that commissioner and staff discussing it. Are others allowed to say anything, or do we have to
Of
wait?
course, Commissioner Nicolello brought something up.
Well, that's what I
just
wanted.
want to make sure that we
Yeah,
stay in the
well, I
queue.
thought that we wanted to keep the discussion. When I looked at number 20, my thought was consider safety first, and then it specifically talks about the vehicle because its severity of crashes through design, operation, and whatever. And then it goes down and says prioritize safety improvements for people who walk. And so the issue is when you're looking at multimodal, what comes first, the number of crashes, or what happens if a vehicle hits a person? That's not a crash, and that hasn't to do, it's safety of people who walk. So I kind of agree with Commissioner Mills is that there has to be some ranking when we're looking at something that's multimodal and it's going to be safety first. It would seem to me the people come first and the vehicles things would be second. That's how I view it, but I don't know if
I think that's the intent here. I just looked up the word prioritize, and it has two meanings. One is to emphasize something, to make it at the top.
okay.
The other is to put things in an order. So we were thinking the former, and you were thinking the latter.
Well, I was thinking of the danger of people interpreting
Right.
it as the latter.
Right.
That was,
Yeah.
I don't want to overwrought this discussion, because I think I understand what you're saying here, but to me, it is somewhat vague, and I think I'm hearing something of the same from
So-
Commissioner Jaworski, and maybe it's okay to leave it vague. I just feel like, obviously we're writing some policy here, and maybe you don't want to be too specific. but-
It was, part of what Commissioner Nicolello raised was we were trying to take language specifically from the resolution, and the resolution has some vague language in it because of the understanding it would kind of be ferreted out in more detail. That doesn't mean, that's just an explanation of why it has the words that it has. It certainly doesn't mean that you can't have different words here, but that's just a explanation of where where that came from.
So in order to just move this forward, can I get a show of hands, once again, straw poll vote, who would like to spend some time looking at revised words?
Oh, I'll raise my hand on that, sure.
I actually just have a comment that I was going to make when I was in the queue.
That is relevant to
That's
this?
relevant to
Okay,
this.
Commissioner
So maybe
Randall.
before we do the straw poll, in looking at this, what I was going to say is that, again, as you mentioned, this pulls from the original city council ordinance or resolution, and using that word prioritize safety improvements. And if you look at that in context, I would say, anybody could straight-faced say that that means to place a high priority on it, not to just put it in some sort of priority. That's the way I see that resolution. So if you take that whole area of Vision Zero in that context, that's the way I would read that second, prioritize safety improvements for people who walk, bike, and use mobility devices. So, I think I don't have a problem with the way that's worded, or a problem with the idea that prioritize there would mean place a high priority on. I think that's, to me, clear if you take the whole thing in context. That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Nicolello.
I'd also add that I would be uncomfortable with changing that language because it's based on the city council adopted goal, but because I can also attest to the robust level of public involvement that went into developing this language. Best worked very, very closely with city staff over the course of months to try and develop this, and it went to council, and now there's a task force as well. And Best is also now part of a coalition working on this, including the AARP, including Peace Health, and a lot of other folks. And so I don't know if that helps, put people at ease, but I would say because of that robust level of public involvement, I'm very much willing to help come up with some suggestions, but I would say personally I'm uncomfortable with changing even just that word because it is so tightly locked into a lot of public involvement.
So just to summarize, it sounds like you don't want to participate in any word change, and that's okay.
But I'm like I said, but like I said, I'm happy if that's where the commission wants to go. I'm happy to help folks figure out. I mean, it's where the majority wants to go. So,
Commissioner Mills.
I think I'm going to lose this one, so you should probably just give it a vote, and I'll vote against, and we'll move on, and you'll have a majority.
Oh, that's what I was going to do. Thank
Okay.
you. Straw poll vote. Those that would like to look at the language and make some amendments per Commissioner Mills' proposal. 2. Those that would like to leave it as is. Yeah, that's 4-2. So does anybody else have any, sorry, that's 4-2, 4 in favor of just leaving the language. Any other items in this category? Commissioner Borowski and then Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, the only thing that I had was on number 19, again, language. And the following potential action, and it says, but by July 2017, complete a Vision Zero action plan. Well, that doesn't sound very potential to me. So I could say, if you took out by July 2017, I could feel fine with it, but setting a date certain, and we know that that's coming, but setting a date certain to me doesn't say potential.
I can tell you why it's under the potential action items, is there wasn't anywhere else to put it. We don't have, in-process action items. This was a request that came from Best to recognize that that action plan is happening or needs to happen, and it already is in process. We have the committees already established for that action plan. So it was really a lack of another place to put it, while still recognizing that that action plan is happening. And
Well, and my concern is that sometimes things get postponed.
Mm-hmm.
And by putting date certain in potential action, I just don't feel comfortable with that wording.
so delete the by July 2017.
I think just if it's a potential action, complete a Vision Zero action plan to achieve the goals would work for me in a 20-year planning document. That doesn't take away from the direction that council has given to the task force to get it done by July 2017. But in the 20-year planning document, I don't think it needs to be in there, but that's just my take on it. I don't know what the rest of the commission.
Is there any further discussion on this item? I'm just going to take a straw poll vote. All those in favor of removing by July 2017? Okay, that was 4 yes.
Sorry.
All those in favor of just leaving it as is? 2. 4 in favor of removing, 2 in placing, or in leaving it in place. So, any other, Commissioner Jaworski? Thank you, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up 20. I was going to say the same thing for 19. To prioritize the last part of that we already discussed and took a vote on, I just wanted to ask on 5143, is that taken as a quote from the resolution, the way it's worded?
I just tried to find, I didn't bring the resolution with me, and I apologize. I don't know. It was, the resolution was, had a number of whereas clauses and also another, so I don't.
Okay,
Probably
well,
not a direct.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that earlier, but didn't get it in. And under the one we just voted on 19th, by July 2017, was that council direction, that date?
If I recall correctly, that was a request from BEST. That was from the public comment that was submitted from this particular group.
Oh, okay,
They
so
had-
it wasn't the council that said that.
That was a request from, right.
Okay.
I don't believe the council resolution had a specific
It
date.
Okay. Here's my question is, and I didn't know where to put it because it's a missing item, but this section here seemed to be talking about, in general, policies, but there was no section that talked about policies. When I go back to our last meeting, July 28th, and I look at the comments that came in from people, there was an issue, and I also think it was an issue that was brought up at one of our commission meetings, talking about things in general, that had to do with the council bringing up a policy to bring sidewalk policy into alignment with complete streets, so that it could be required that sidewalks be completed at the time of development, and that the gaps in sidewalks created by adjacent properties be filled in, making the entire street safe. That's not addressed anywhere in here, and I'm wondering why it wasn't, and I think it's important, and it gets to safety improvements for people who walk, bike, et cetera, and so why was that not, I mean, you didn't feel that was something that could be recommended to go to the council to consider? That they complete these sidewalks and gaps that are there, rather than relying on that individual person to finally say, I'll build a sidewalk, so everybody doesn't have to walk in
So
the
just to be
street?
clear, under pedestrian policies, potential action E does not get at what you're talking about.
Give us a page
Can
number.
you-
Oh, sorry, page 24 of the plan.
So that one states, amend the Eugene Code EC 9.6505 and policies to consistently require sidewalk installation throughout newly divided and developed lands, such as by requiring sidewalk construction concurrent with street improvements or by bonding for completion of the sidewalks if development on individual lots does not fill in the system in a reasonable amount of time.
So that was, if that was in there in the initial plan, why were there comments that were saying it was missing and should be in there then? I don't understand.
And then H2, I think I said this a little bit, update Eugene's traffic impact analysis, review regulations for new development to include review of walking and biking improvements and connections to nearby networks.
Okay. Okay.
In all fairness to folks that submitted their comments, this is a fairly meaty document. So one of two things, either they didn't see it or it doesn't say it exactly as some folks would like it to be said. I mean, it could be one of two things.
Okay.
You know, I think part of what you're getting at maybe is when you have like a new development, say out on the periphery, and we require a street to serve it, but we don't require the adjacent sidewalk to connect to that new development. And so the question is, could we require that kind of a sidewalk connection? And I don't know if we legally can do that, but we will look into that.
Okay.
And part of it is, you know, there's annexation issues bound up in that too. I mean, it's not a simple issue, but I agree, and I think this reflects that that's a desire, and that's something that we should try to figure out if we can make it happen.
Yeah, okay, I'm looking at page 24, that addresses what I wanted. I just wish you didn't say a reasonable amount of time, because that could end up being 20 years. So I don't know what reasonable is, so, but anyway, thank you.
So if there aren't any other comments to this category, straw poll vote, all those in favor of moving forward, adopting the revisions as proposed with the exception of number 19, we're in favor of removing July 2017. So all those in favor with that amendment? So that's 5, all those not in favor? 1, 5 to 1. Okay. And once again, it's straw poll vote. Okay, next category, revisions regarding level of service. Commissioner Randall.
I think my question really gets to the performance measurement I had in my notes from
Do you want to,
our-
which one are you talking
Oh,
about?
excuse me, well, it doesn't completely fit, and so maybe
Yeah.
as I ask the question,
sure.
it'll become clear.
Okay.
I wasn't sure which category to put it under. It might have best fit under other at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But we had item 15 in our, let's see which AIS this was from our September 26th meeting. Item 15 was to revise attachment C to the 2035 TSP to address potential inconsistencies between the performance measures and the benchmarks approved by LCDC. And I had in my notes to define performance measures, and I didn't see where any definition of performance measures actually made it into this. And I wasn't sure if we decided we were going to go ahead and do that or if we weren't. My notes just say define performance measures, and so I just wanted to make sure. I know oftentimes as I deal with code issues, definitions are very helpful, because then you just don't make assumptions, and there are actually a lot of things in the code that aren't defined. So I just wasn't sure if this is the place to talk about this or if it should go under that other category at the end.
I can certainly speak to it, and unfortunately, when it comes to that attachment C, what we're working with is an OAR. So what we did instead, because there isn't just a definition that I could pull from the Oregon administrative rules, and I thought I might be overstepping if I defined a term for them, though I'd like to. But so we provided just kind of some textual explanation in attachment C of what folks are looking at when they look at that chart. So it's under benchmarks. It's attachment C. It's three introductory paragraphs that just kind of try to explain to folks what they're looking at, short of coming up with a definition of performance measure, because it's all about increasing transportation choices and decreasing reliance on the automobile. That's what these performance measures are intended to be doing, and so that's just a whole lot of words that they'll provide a good definition. But and then what we did, and also you'll see, it's we'll get to it under the next category, and I apologize, I'm skipping ahead, but that replacement is what the other thing that's in your packet. So that attachment 2 there. But that's the way we want to.
So basically that chart at the end is kind of the definition of performance measures.
Right.
Because it has those detailed things in it.
So the performance measures themselves are the ways that we are going to try to increase transportation choices and reduce reliance on the automobile. So, for example, having priority bikeway, a certain number of priority bikeway miles increases that choice and would hopefully decrease the reliance on the automobile.
And hopefully achieves those performance measures.
Right. It's circular, and yes.
So the preamble will be the same, but we're changing the
Yes.
table.
The preamble will stay the same because hopefully that provides the explanation of why we've got that in there, and then the proposed change. And that was a comment and a request from DLCD staff that we took too many liberties, I guess. We stretched it too far, and we needed to come back to what they had approved back in 2001. So we did that. We rejiggered it back.
And remember, as part of adopting the Regional Transportation System Plan, which will come through the Planning Commission, we'll then go back and update the TSP to be consistent with that, and that'll be an opportunity too to decide as a city if we want any local performance measures that LCDC is not party to. We could add them at that point. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Mills and then Commissioner Nicolello.
This is just in the way of a comment. I'm looking to staff here to make sure I've got a clear understanding of the intent. And that is for item 21, that is going to be added in for the sake of clarity. I think that was an item where we want to make sure we have those definitions in. And I guess you also, I feel, could bring into this some of the other language that there's a couple of bullets from a previous AIS, and I apologize to take us so far back here, from July 18. And it's PC agenda item 16. And under that just gives some definitions, which I guess I'd like to, which are not included in your perspective text. And V/C represents a facility's level of saturation, what proportion of capacity is being used, with values ranging from 0 to 1. A lower ratio indicates smooth operations and minimal delays. As the ratio approaches 1, congestion increases and performance is degraded.
That is in number 21.
Is it there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the first bullet.
Let me continue. Okay, so it's on 21.
Yeah,
Okay.
the first bullet. There's some slight variations in the wording.
Okay, and I'm going to, let me read what I've got back here that I've highlighted. At a ratio of 1, the intersection lane or movement is saturated and usually experiences successive queues or long delays. I don't know if that sentence is included.
Yeah.
Yep.
Almost verbatim.
And then under LOS, and I guess this is under which item that you guys?
It's the first one, right there. Oop,
Okay, there
we
it
go.
is. And the wording that under V/C, I'm sorry, under LOS, it says, please bear with me here. I'm having to go back and forth here a little bit.
Do you want to look at that while I?
No, I've got them both here. I'm just trying to see how the wording compares, because I don't think the wording is the same.
They're pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Since I know that, Julia from Kittleson, because we were going to add, the proposal was to add this directly into the TSP. She tweaked it a little bit. She had a couple suggestions just to fine tune it a little bit, because it was going to actually be language in the plan. So that might be a few of the discrepancies you see, but it's generally, I think the intent was to be, because the request that we heard at the last meeting was that would be great and helpful to have it in the
And I
plan.
commend staff for basically doing that, so I'm real happy to see this included. I just had a concern that the wording had been changed to mitigate how bad it could get at an F or a
I see.
1. That's my concern.
I see.
Because the wording I'm looking at from previous is LOS ref, F represents conditions where average vehicle delay has become excessive and demand is near capacity. The condition is typically evident by long queues and delays, with intersection delays often being difficult to measure because congestion may extend into and be affected by adjacent intersections.
That's still in.
Most
And that's
of
still
their-
there? Okay, then I'm going to pull back and say, good job, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry for the,
No, that's
I
good.
have Commissioner Nicolello and then Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, so just looking at number 22, the following potential action to amend the city's adopted traffic impact analysis code. I'm totally comfortable with number 23, but I will admit that number 22 does make me uncomfortable as a suggested action to add. I'd like to propose striking it because what it's suggesting is that it would expand potential mitigation measures beyond measures that address only vehicular delay, and that's already addressed pretty thoroughly in the code. The code has a lot of very strict requirements for putting in sidewalks, for putting in and doing improvements for developers, and so there's a sense of redundancy, I feel, that is in that. And then also, too, to expand the measurement of a proposed development's traffic impacts beyond the level of service measurement, that's also one that perhaps gives me pause as well, because there's really no quantitative way to measure that. That is extremely qualitative, and I will say that when you have that level of discretion in your code, it can make it very difficult sometimes, because a lot of times with transportation, you're operating on how different people feel, and a lot of people experience facilities in very different ways. And so just based on the fact that, one, this is already in the code, and two, the level of discretion that can be drawn from this, that really makes it hard to do a TIA in a true quantitative sense, I would feel uncomfortable pushing this forward unless I knew that there were quantitative ways to measure that in a multimodal fashion. And based on a number of conversations with transportation staff, it doesn't sound like we're quite there yet. So totally, if perhaps there's more nuance to provide there, I'd love to hear what staff's perspective on that is.
I can tell you that one of the reasons why, or the primary reason that was added or recommended to be added
22?
was number 22, yes, was in response to concerns that were raised at the first work session and during the public testimony about being cognitive that there is a overall lowering of the level of service within this plan. And so folks asked questions and raised concerns that, well, if our entire transportation impact requirements of the code are based to level of service and you lower level of service, then you're kind of creating a vacuum there. And so this proposal was intended to be responsive of that.
And just to add to that, like right now, the city can only make requirements upon a developer in response to a TA that relate to vehicular delay. So if there are like pedestrian and bicycle issues related to that development, we cannot require them through a TIA process. So the idea here would be to look at how can we change our TIA regulations to be different than how they are now, and look at how are other cities doing this. It's, this isn't really prescriptive here. I think it's sort of saying amend it to expand the measurement. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Rob, I was just going to ask, and so can I read in your statement that it's, in your view, number 22 helps the city with that issue of being able to provide additional emphasis for other modes besides vehicular?
Right.
So that, in that sense, it's not redundant? It would be additive?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to make sure, hang on, there's a lot of people in the queue. Sorry, I want to make sure. So I think Commissioner Borowski, you were next. Do you have something relevant to this section, or do you want me to wait? Okay.
I mean, can I just, the other thing too, and I think 23 gets at this a little bit, but there's other elements of how a development affects the transportation system beyond delay that may be worth looking at.
Yeah.
So we'd like to explore that, because right now, delay is the only measure we have. And we don't know if there are better ones, but it's something that we think is worth exploring.
Okay.
So I want to stay specific on this topic of 22, 23, because it's bringing up a lot of discussion. So I have Commissioner Borowski. So let's just have it focused on 23, 24. Or, excuse
And
me,
21.
22.
Well, 21 as well.
21 we passed, so bring it up next. But let's stay specifically focused on 22, 23. And then we'll bring that one up again. This is specific to what Commissioner Nuccolello has brought up. So let's...
She also mentioned number 25, I think, in her comments.
Yeah, I don't...
Just 22. I said I liked 23.
Oh, I thought you had mentioned 25, excuse me.
So we're just having a discussion. I just want to make
too.
sure it's
No, I
not...
know, I'm just trying to figure out if my questions are relevant to her thing, because I have questions on 21, 22, 23, and 24, and I don't know if they fall into her pigeonhole.
So really what she's saying, she wants to remove 22.
Right.
Do you have any comments around that?
I would not be in favor of that.
Okay. So
But I have other comments on 22.
Okay, great. Commissioner Randall?
And I would also not be in favor of removing 22, partly because of what Commissioner Mills clarified with Rob, as far as that this gives the city the ability to look beyond just vehicular traffic, or at least gets us going that direction in looking at the impact of a development. And I think that's good, because I've always thought it's kind of odd that all we really look at is vehicular traffic. It's similar to the railroad quiet zone, as the committee has looked at that. Really, the only issues that the railway cares about are car crashes at intersections, and they don't really look at pedestrian deaths or fatalities, where that's actually a much larger issue than vehicular crashes. And so I think we need to start getting there as far as changing our way of thinking and looking at things, and I think this helps with that. So I would be in favor of leaving that in.
I have Commissioner Mills, and then Commissioner Jaworski, and then Commissioner Nicolello.
My initial note on this item 22 was that it seemed the wording seemed vague to me. I wasn't quite clear on where you were going with it. I have a better feel for, now that you've explained it to me, I have a better feel for that. I don't have a suggested word change, but that was my comment on that. I also wouldn't be in favor of removing it, since it does seem to have an additive benefit for transportation, so.
Commissioner Jaworski?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak that I would not be in favor of removing it. It gets back to number 20, which we talked about, prioritizing people who walk and bike and whatever. And in my neighborhood right now, we're having that problem when a TIA was done that didn't address anything to do with other than vehicle traffic, and it didn't address the intersections where people cross streets, walk, and do other things. So it's important, I think, to have it.
Commissioner Nicolello?
I just wanted to address, obviously, folks here know that I'm a pretty big proponent for multimodal transportation, but I'm not a big fan of redundancies throughout the code. And I personally feel that there's other sections in the code that already address that. And perhaps that's an internal conversation that needs to be had over maybe looking at those code sections per se, but we have street connectivity standards, we have sidewalk standards, we have a lot of standards that folks have to follow. And so, you know, for me, I mean, TIAs are very specific. They're triggered for only a certain number of trips. And so, one, you're not even looking at the whole entire solution from a comprehensive standpoint, but also two, you know, I worry that it will just create more redundancies throughout the code. And so, and we've had conversations here about how we can streamline and make our code more efficient and more effective and more user-friendly to achieve our goals. And so I was just coming from that standpoint. Of course, I understand that if we take a vote, I'll probably not win on this one. But, you know, perhaps just thinking about it from that perspective, and I just wanted to bring that forward.
So I'm going to put myself in the queue. So there's a subtlety here in terms of the code that isn't redundant, and that is a TIA serves a certain purpose. So if there's connectivity, et cetera, you know, when you go in to go through a development permit, there are certain code sections that apply depending on what you're proposing. This traffic impact analysis, actually, I do agree with maintaining it, because it actually covers something that is not redundant. And that is that mitigation measure that when it's triggered, it's addressed from a holistic kind of complete streets perspective, which is consistent with the rest of the TSP. One of my concerns is the same as Commissioner Mills. I do agree with what Commissioner Mills and then Commissioner Nicolello brought up, is that I really don't want to see it be vaguely instituted, because from a position of development, when you get to a level of subjectivity, which this really has, it's not effective at all. And I know this is a 20-year plan. It's not what the code's going to look like. Mm-hmm. It's just not. Is it giving? I guess I would ask staff. Is it giving staff the direction they truly need to have the right idea? I mean, is the language clear enough?
I think there's language in here somewhere that says this plan does not apply to developers.
It does. No, it
This
doesn't.
applies-
And I recognize
so
that.
this is really to get some of these items here are basically to get a process going to update to re-look at the TIA element of our code and update it.
Can I interrupt really
Yeah.
quick? So I'm clear about that. My question is this clear enough for staff to implement the correct language for the code? Or is this too vague for staff to actually implement it? Does that make
I don't think
sense?
this constrains what an update to the code would include. This is just advisory, this is a potential action.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be really detailed. I mean, that,
Fortunately, I mean, you have the same people that have been working on this and listening to all these conversations would be the one looking at the code.
That makes
So
me feel better.
it is. It's the same group. You'll have Rob there. I'll be involved. It's the and Scott Gillespie and others. And once we, when it starts getting into some potential code language, obviously that'll all come to you as well, which is effective. But I don't have concerns with it being too vague for staff to start, particularly since we also know the genesis of it, which was some concerns raised about level of service and some restricting parameters upon the current scope. So I'm comfortable with that.
So Commissioner Bobrowski, did you have another comment on this one?
I'm just wondering when
Okay.
when we're getting back to the regular queue.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think let's do a quick straw poll vote because it was brought up. All those in favor of leaving it? Those opposed? Thank you. That was 5 in favor of leaving it, 1 opposed. Now, Commissioner Bobrowski, I know you're at the seat of your,
Well,
you're
no.
at the front of your seat,
you.
almost jumping out. It's your turn.
Okay, so I guess this goes to 21, 22, 23, 24. And I guess, first my question would be, and I've heard from people about level of service and the reduction of level of service citywide. Would we be able to meet our goals of reducing the vehicle miles traveled or whatever we're trying to do overall with our overarching goals if we didn't reduce that from level E or from D to E? That would be a question.
E to F.
Or,
There's two standards
yeah,
there.
oh, good. Yeah, well, downtown's F, but the
Downtown's
citywide for E.
I think that's a pretty subjective question.
Okay.
And I can tell you what my opinion is, but I don't,
That'd be
to
fine.
answer the question from a scientific perspective, I think would be really challenging. I think some of the things that could be required for mitigation when you have a D rather than an E would be things like widening intersections.
Right.
And that makes it more challenging to walk when you have to have a longer street crossing. There are some streets where we're looking at, through the moving ahead process, of actually repurposing vehicle lanes as BAT lanes, the bus and turn lanes on River Road and Martin Luther King. So that could also be an issue in situations like that, where it could be that, I don't know for sure, but it could be on River Road. Maybe it would be an E when you take the lane out. I don't think it will be, but I think that's a possibility. So, it's just, I think it kind of gets at some of those
Okay.
issues.
So then, my second thing goes to, on 22, 23, 24, and 25, those are all potential action items. So my question is, how do we know that those will be done? What type of funding is there to do those? Because those are all cognizant on the level of service is going to change. And all these mitigation things are potential. So I hear from you, we're going to do these things, but there's no certainty of that. But there is a certainty that the level of service citywide is going to drop, and the VCs on all of these corridors are going to go to 1. So that gives me pause, and it gives people in the community pause. So
Right.
how do we answer that?
Well, one thing
How do we know where it's going to get done, and where is the funding to do the work to update these codes? Where is that coming from?
I mean, one thing I can tell you is we're starting the process already for 22 and 23. So that Scott Gillespie in engineering is leading that effort. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, that kind of gets at to this, things like the city budget and staff capacity and prioritization. And I don't think there's any easy answer to that
Because,
question.
because if those answers, if I can't get that answered, I can't come to a yes vote. And I'll let it go there.
Commissioner Mills and then Commissioner Jaworski.
Are we doing discussion on what he said?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, on the general level of service and B/C for the city and downtown area, I have, I think I expressed this at the last meeting, and I understand we're not changing the table, and I understand why, and I'm not challenging that, but I have similar concerns to those of Commissioner Borofsky about where this leaves the city, not only in terms of funding, but in terms of high health and vitality. So I'm not going to be able to vote for this area either on those concerns. I've got other concerns about some of the specifics I might still try to talk to, but I'm very concerned about the level of service table as laid out for the next 20 years in the TSP.
Commissioner Jaworski.
I think this was brought up earlier, and it gets to this discussion, and I agree with what you said, that if you have to increase capacity on the street because you can't rip up the streets anymore because of sidewalks, everything's there. So the question that was brought up earlier, which I didn't see addressed, is, well, then why don't you do lowering of the LOS on those areas where there are build-up streets and this can't happen, so that when development is occurring somewhere else where, like, it's a new street or an undeveloped street, you don't have to go with the lower LOS. You can do it with the other one because you can make the street as wide as you want because it hasn't been built yet or it hasn't been built out.
Well, I think to get at something that Commissioner Nicola said earlier, there's other parts of the code that speak to that. I mean, we have street development standards that apply. So most development is not affected by our level of service standard.
Well, if I'm a developer and I'm building on a place that just has an undeveloped street and I do a TIA, based on this, I'm doing it to an LOS that'll allow this to happen. So if I allow that much traffic to happen, I don't have to widen that street at that time. Is that not correct?
Well, my point is that it's pretty uncommon that mitigation happens regardless. So most development is not affected by our level of service standards. Like how wide a developer has to build a street is more about what our street standards are, which we're actually updating right now.
It's a different
So you're going to permit streets, you're going to encourage streets to be wider than the first development because you'll assume that other development will occur there and you don't want to run into this problem of the LOS being lower.
No, we have street design standards. We're updating them now. They're generally not driven by what you're raising. I mean, they're driven by how do you create a good multimodal street that works for all modes. That's kind of the lens that we're looking at our street design through. And also keep in mind, most of the streets that developers are building are local streets and some neighborhood collectors. So our major street system is pretty much for the most part built out.
And so when it comes to the design standards, it's not it's based on the street classification. So a local street has to be X wide, a neighborhood collector has to be Y wide. So it's not that it's based on the level of service is gauging how it's functioning. It's not about the design of a new street.
Okay, but let's just say local street. A local street, what, 750 you can have on a local street, maybe, for vehicle traffic? And what will lowering the standard allow to go on that local street?
Doesn't affect that.
Doesn't affect.
It doesn't affect it. LOS is saying that you can have more capacity, more traffic on the same existing street. Is that not correct?
It's saying that you can have more delay at intersections. So level of service standard applies to intersection delay.
Okay,
How
so
long do you have to wait?
so if a street that handles 750 with the current delay, and now it could be exceeded, so that same street could now go up to 900 or 1,000 cars because the delay would fall within the new criteria. I'll put it that way.
Most local streets are A or B. It's not an issue with local streets. It's pretty uncommon that this would ever even be an issue with a local street.
It will never be an issue with a local street.
I said it's
Okay.
pretty uncommon.
Well, it could be an issue.
Right.
So we're here to prevent issues and problems from happening, not just to say that they're the smaller percentage of what might occur.
But I think that, so if you have a street that goes beyond, you still have a local street that is characterized as a local street based on the number of trips, right? So take 750. If it tips it so it goes, so it's no longer classified as a local street, the design standards would be to the classification that it is. The level of service part is how much delay would occur at the intersection.
But the street's already built, so you can't change the design standard.
So
So the mitigation for, when there is a mitigation required, developers, it's often at intersections. Not always, I mean, but it's often at intersections of adding a turn lane to an intersection, for example. So that, because that's where the delay happens, especially with a level of service standard, which is our mobility standard here in Eugene.
I thought I was told earlier, and then I'll just keep quiet, that LOS had no impact on signalization. I had heard that somewhere here, that you don't use LOS to determine whether an intersection has a signal or not.
So that is maybe true. So
Okay.
there are warrants, there's a whole set, I don't, like a warrant analysis for
I understand, but
signal, and so I'm not sure to what, it's not an area of expertise for me, so I'm not sure how delay factors into that, but I know that traffic volume factors into warrant analysis.
okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got a long queue. Let's stay on this, well, I'm not sure it needs to, but I've got Commissioner Nicolello, Randall, and then Borowski.
Yes, I'm just looking for clarification of round 21. I'm hearing a lot of concern over level of service, and I'm just trying to bar down a little bit to see kind of where that concern is. From our previous meetings, we've all been relatively in favor. I've heard of us lowering level of service, and I might have misheard, and if I did, I apologize. I know there's been some folks who have been against that, so I want to make sure I throw that part in. But generally speaking, there's been support for that. I think that level of service is a bit of a tricky thing because it kind of takes a traffic engineer's understanding on how to approach it. But generally speaking, this does help us meet, our goals in terms of meeting our climate change goals, in terms of meeting our climate recovery ordinance goals. So I guess I'm just trying to understand what the discussion around 21 is around and what's exactly being proposed.
Can I say something, Kristen?
Please.
And I've
So
got an answer
let's
to
just
that.
say our level of service standard was an A for the city. That's like basically saying you're going to build your city for cars, okay? And we're saying we're trying to cut our greenhouse gas emissions as a city in half. So it's kind of like you can't have both. And so that's one, just at sort of a high level, that's why we're recommending to have the standard go to an E from a D. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's.
That's not my concern. So let me just,
Yeah.
if I can I? My concern is that right now, the trigger we have is a change in LOS. If a big development comes in, and I'm not saying a housing development, if a big project comes in, okay? If the University of Oregon put an arena and a traffic impact analysis showed, the only trigger right now that we have is the going from LOS to down. And 22, 23, and 24 are saying, we're going to put different triggers in, trust us, okay? That's what I'm concerned, because right now we have a trigger that is the trigger is getting harder to pull, let's say, all right? It's getting harder to pull. So in big developments, let's say there's a $500 million science center going in near one of our major corridors. And the VC on that corridor has gone to 1.0. That trigger isn't there now to help us impact, if there's impacts to the neighborhood that is going to happen because the LOS is dropped and there's going to be cut-throughs. Now, it's put in there in 22, 23, and 24, but it's not firm. And we don't know what the new triggers are going to be at this point. That's what gives me that's what makes me feel uncomfortable.
So
And I'm sorry, real quick. What
Yeah.
I think I hear from you is some things that we've seen in the past is you would want to see concurrent code amendments.
Yeah.
That effectuate 22, 23, and 24.
Right.
Not, we'll make the code amendments.
Right, potential actions as opposed to, we're losing a trigger, or the trigger is being lowered because that is going to happen. And the potential remedies for that happening aren't in here yet.
So I want to follow up with that, and ask Steph a question. It seems like it addresses Commissioner Borowski's as well as Mills' concern, or at least a portion of Commissioner Mills. And that is, at this stage, what is the way for us to make a recommendation? What is the approach or methodology to make a recommendation at this stage to City Council that essentially we want to see 22, 23, 24, 25 to be prioritized? Because I recognize you got a TSP, you got a 20-year plan. We are going to, like Commissioner Brodsky's brought up, enact a level of service, but we don't necessarily have that follow-up measure, criteria of standard, et cetera. So how do we approach it?
I mean, there's a couple different ways. I mean, you can recommend that the council adopt this contingent upon concurrent amendments to the code. You can say that you won't recommend this until you have that package of code amendments that go along with it. Robin, you can probably speak to other ones. I mean, there's a lot of different options for you, really.
I really want to throw out, hopefully I don't want to step on anybody's toes, and we can take a straw poll. I would really like to not hold up the TSP for this particular item, but if we can kind of explore how we can deal with just this specific issue.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was going to suggest too, is both of the things that you suggested would require substantial additional work. It's sort of like where we have a large 20-year plan that's looking at the entire community, and of course trying to balance a huge amount of different priorities across the community. Especially, I think those really come together when we talk about level of service. We're talking about urbanization of our community. We're talking about how we achieve Vision Zero, climate recovery, walkable, compact neighborhoods, where we talk about community health. All of these things come into play when we start talking about level of service, because level of service was a standard generated decades ago, many decades ago, before we had these other policy areas in front of us to consider. And so what we're faced with right now is essentially trying to take and you guys jump in here, but it's essentially, it's an old way of looking at how we measure our transportation system, and we're trying to connect that into our modern views of how we build a community. So that aside, I would just say that there are probably a lot of other things in the plan that are like this, where there's going to be some kind of a project that comes out of it where the community will have to wrestle with the specific aspects of that project and that action. And this sounds like one of them. And so I'm trying to think of, well, I guess my request would be if commissioners have a concern with a piece of this, if you could suggest a way to mitigate that concern, is by adding an action to the plan or by beefing something up or something along those lines that's not as draconian as just saying, hey, the whole 20-year plan isn't going to work because of this item.
It's a great idea. Okay, I have two people. Let's try to keep it to this topic. Commissioner Nicolello, Commissioner Randall.
I'm going to say that I'm personally fine with this language in 21 and then in 22 through 25. I mean, this is a strategic 20-year plan. It can only get so specific, and that's the purpose of the action items. That's the purpose of the action plan. I'll also add too, because I'm hearing this kind of implied in a lot of the language, is this idea of we're losing a trigger, and you still, for major developments, you still have to do a traffic impact analysis. Now that traffic impact analysis is going to be even more robust, and I'm hearing this, we need to mitigate the level of service, and to an extent, that kind of just undoes the purpose of lowering level of service in the first place. Lowering level of service is intended to help us create, yes, you know, there will be less vehicular delay, but to also create a more walkable neighborhood, to create a neighborhood that allows us to meet those carbon goals. And so I'm still very unclear as to where that concern is. If folks want to explore things, they can, but I really don't see why we're trying to change this, frankly. I think that, you know, my personal feelings about 22 aside, it rather robustly addresses the level of service concerns, and it's in our TSP. The purpose of it is that it will be implemented, you know, if it is one of these action items.
Commissioner Randall?
Well, I think Commissioner Nicolello said a lot of what I was going to say. I think the whole level of service is based on vehicles. And if we're going to multimodal, we've got to be thinking differently. And so I'm less concerned about lowering level of service if we have some of these other action items in place that help us get toward that multimodal way of getting around. As an example, I think LTD recently, because of ridership, increased the frequency of the bus routes out Coburg Road and River Road. And so, you know, I think as we've been stepping through, and it's not easy stuff to do because we've been locked into automobiles for, you know, however many years, solely automobiles. And so, you know, because ridership has increased, they've increased the level of frequency, which will only, I think, increase the bus ridership levels and help us achieve some of those goals. And so I think hitting those LOS, I think I think the word draconian came out earlier, and I think that's true. And so I've forgotten my other point. So, but I think,
Okay.
but that, I agree. I think we leave it as is.
Okay, Commissioner Jaworski, and then Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I'm about 95%. I agree with Commissioner Nicolello and Randall. I like everything that's in here. My only problem is on all the items that they say potential action. And that's what gets me, because it may never happen. And I think that when you're implementing something, I assume as soon as possible, the LOS would be lowered when this is adopted, you're not addressing the mitigation impacts of what that means. And I feel that there should be something stronger, and I would think I'd like to see potential action removed and just say we're going to do the following either as soon as possible or within a year or two, something that says this is going to happen. Otherwise, we're just saying we're doing this. These are some nice things, but we're not doing the nice things to really address it. That's my concern. I have no problem with it except the fact that it says potential action and doesn't state when it'll be there, and I think it should be as soon as it can be done, either financial,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah,
So,
that's clear.
and can I, and,
Yeah.
and what I think maybe of assistance, so unfortunately, we're working with headings that were intended to be generic. So within the TSP where these would be inserted, the heading itself is potential actions. And so, because you have goals, policies, and then potential actions. So if you wanted to add to any of these within blank number of years or within blank, I mean, that absolutely, you could do that because
Or on the,
Hang on one second, let her finish.
that's really all I had to say. If you wanted to add in just a timeframe that is anticipated it would happen within.
or on the other, and this goes to what Commissioner Jaworski just said. I have the same thing. I don't have any problem with lowering the LOS as long as these other things are done. You know, and that's what it gets to. So could it, instead of saying by this date, could we say once 22, 23, 24, and 25 are done, that's when we can lower the LOS?
It makes the, so
That's
Basically-
when table 4.1 would be adopted.
well, but the problem is table 4.1 isn't standalone. The proposed projects and all of that, it's a little, it's all built upon each other. So if the proposal was, we want to adopt this minus the LOS, minus the change in the LOS, what you would hear is, we'll need to come back to you with a different plan. So if what I think I hear you saying is, well, we'll adopt the plan, but that table is contingent upon X, Y, and Z happening, the plan, as I understand it from our traffic engineers, isn't standalone without the change in LOS. It's a interwoven approach.
Yes.
I wonder if, and I have mixed feelings about suggesting this, but I wonder if
What are you gonna
adding
say?
a policy under system-wide policies along the lines of something like, accept that we'll have more delay in our transportation system and make, in order to accommodate that, have a broader, I don't know, something as a policy to basically get at
A broad policy
this kind of
statement about-
tension without, so that might carry a little more weight than a potential action. And I'm not sure how to word that, and so that was my mixed feeling, because I realized we're probably not going to be able to do that around the table today,
Right.
but.
Hang on one second.
But it's still my turn, right? She was answering my
Yeah,
question.
it's all right. Yeah, we just have a lot of people, so if you can keep it concise, new information.
Well, no, go ahead. That's fine. Moving
Okay.
on.
Commissioner Randall and then Nicolello.
I remembered my second point, and it got back to the floating the idea of trying to adopt this with code amendments concurrently or that. And it seems to me that the transportation system plan is the policy document that we adopt that then allows us to write code. And so I wouldn't be in favor of trying to do that concurrently. I think we need to adopt this, establish our policies, and then work on writing the code. So that was my second.
Okay, perfect. Commissioner Nicolello and then Commissioner Borowski.
I'm hearing a lot of concern over just the usage of the word potential, which I can understand does leave a degree of vagueness to it. Can you just change the heading of the section and take away the word potential? Like, does it have to be potential actions? Is that required by DLCD, or
No.
can we just,
No.
I mean,
What we didn't want to do is create an expectation. I mean, there's a lot of action items in here. What we didn't want to do is create an expectation that they were all going to be done or all going to be done within a certain amount of time. So that's why it was in
maybe
there.
you could just write a quick disclaimer that says what you just said in a much more nicer legal sense. But I think also too, to be perfectly frank, if it's in the TSP, whether this is legally true or not, people will have the expectation that it'll get done. And beyond that too, if that's going to be a problem, then perhaps make that, I'm not a strategic planner, so I apologize if this isn't actually that helpful, but perhaps just say action items and then divide out in progress, and so on and so forth. And maybe that's opening up a bigger can of worms, or you just say action items, because I think you're right, you are going to have people get hung up on potential versus not potential, and they will be frustrated that it's not considered to be a actual action item. And that's really what I think you're seeing here. And so if it's as simple as changing the heading, perhaps that is just maybe a good method to try.
But we'd have an asterisk maybe by the first one that has that disclaimer.
Have a disclaimer in there if that's what's.
Well, and there's right now, the way the TSP defines potential actions as offering direction to the city about steps that could implement adopted policies. And not all policies include the corresponding action items, but, yeah.
I mean, so far we've talked about, this is one set, and then obviously number 19 was another one that's already in place, you said, but consistent with language, Commissioner Borowski brought up deleting the July 27th because it was inconsistent with potential. I mean, maybe if this truly is the objective, there are certain potential action items that are identified as actual action
Yeah,
items.
we
And
can
there's
move
an
on.
asterisk, and then we can move on, because it seems like this is going to be a reoccurring subject matter,
So to make sure I understand,
potentially.
we would just change in here, in the plan, the headers would change from potential action items to action items? Is that?
Or whatever, I actually think you could do it the other way. If there's enough ambiguity about most of them, then leave potential in there, but where there's actually one, an asterisk, or there's a note that says,
Move it up to the policies. There's a previous section where you have, typically it'll say pedestrian policies, and then it'll say potential actions for pedestrian policies.
but, so what I was going to say is,
Sorry.
so potential, if let's say 100 are potential and 3 are actions, just make 3 of them actual actions.
In other words, have an actions
And I'm
section
gonna-
and potential actions.
Right.
Is that-
Yeah.
Doesn't that just kind of get us into where we're right now, though?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a solution.
I think that, part of what we're trying, in drafting this was, if we have action items, that different things are important to different folks. And so if you have the list of the action items and they're not as potential, then the expectation is then that will occur. I'm just trying,
So
I'm trying to think of how to address these. And Commissioner Borowski, if they were identified as just action items without the word potential there, would that actually, I heard your concern more concrete than that. Is removing the word potential address what, because originally what you raised here?
I think so. I mean, I trust staff on this. The thing that I'm concerned about is that there's external forces beyond what staff sitting at this table can do, right? There's budgetary problems, I just saw a memo where the taxes came in a couple $1 million shorter than what we were supposed to. So there may be potential that, okay, this is going to get pushed off because there's not the staff to do it. And so, but LOS is going to go down. Like I said, the trigger is going to go down. And there are potential large projects that will be coming up that could get missed. Now, I trust that staff is going to do it, but I don't know.
I don't know if this helps at all. This is a minor thing, but we're talking about, as part of the TIA update, we're also talking about integrating TDM more into our development review. Because I think the action that is in here is really applying more broadly to just larger developers and employers in Eugene.
Right.
To say we need, I don't know how we would do it from a regulatory perspective, but that you need to have a TDM program. But you're not concerned about overall employers that are already there. You're concerned about new development. It's
that's one of them. If we expand the UGB for employment out Clear Lake, that is another area. If you put a big employer out there, those types of things.
But we are talking internally about having TDM be a more robust part of our TIA. I don't know if it's just TIA, but basically our development review framework.
We have a current adopted TDM administrative rule that would be looked at. That's separate from the TIA.
Yeah, it's number 24. So I have to, go ahead, and then I have two people. I'd like to actually wrap this up. It sounds like there's actually quite a few ideas. I'd like to be able to move it forward. So let's have a couple more comments, and then let's have a concrete, options of ways to move it forward. But I first want to take, before we do that, let's get a straw poll vote after the discussion to just even see where we are. Okay, Commissioner Randall, and then I have, Commissioner, do you want to go first, and then Commissioner Mills?
Well, you know what, actually, in favor of what you just said, moving it ahead, I'll pass.
Okay, Commissioner Mills?
Actually, what I had was a question about item 25, and I don't know if it's time to talk about that or not. So I'm willing to wait.
So if you can wait on that, unless it actually impacts the ideas of action versus potential action, how we address this if we do.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I fully understand what staff said, that there's a lot of potential action items in the TSP, but we're not looking at all the potential action items in the TSP. We're only looking at these 4 or so here because they're, to me, important. No one is challenging the others that say potential action items. So far, no one's did it in the public participation either. But under here, we seem to have some issues. And all that I'm saying, either you remove potential action or you just put what's realistic, and you would know that is on 22, 23, 24, 25, whatever. Is 2 years realistic? At least we know that something is going to happen within some time frame, even though it might come out and say, nah, we don't need to really amend much of the transportation demand management plan. We looked at it and this is the only change. But at least we know they're going to happen. And I just kind of feel that these 4 are more important than a lot of the other potential actions you mentioned. I don't really care if they say potential action.
And so that's a very good point, because those were the broad categories, which is why we had that. Having these 4 called out and because they're obviously going to have to get added to this draft, have a section under, you could have, under the system-wide policies, potential action items, you could have a whole nother heading under system-wide that says action items.
Yeah, I'm only looking
Yeah.
at these four.
Right.
What you, one of you.
That's very
said.
helpful. Yeah, I mean, so we create a new category, that we don't try to shoehorn it into one of our existing categories.
Yeah,
It
I don't
also
wanna touch all the others.
signifies the significance and importance of those.
These.
Yes. And perhaps add a section 2, we're adding information to our LOS section. You could include, you could directly reference these action items in the text of our LOS section that again highlights that this is
This is how it's going to be mitigated.
this is a package.
This is how.
We absolutely can do that.
Well, that's what I would like to see. I don't know what the rest of the group, but I see these four as being separate from all the other potentials.
And that was kind of the point that you made it much clearer that I was making.
And I apologize. I didn't-
Yeah, no worries. Commissioner Nicolao, did you have something to add before we actually, no? Okay.
Just clarify, when you say these four, what exactly are you talking about?
22,
22, 23, 24, and 25, if there's no further changes to any of them by the group, but
Okay, so Robin, did you have anything to add?
I don't think so. I mean, well, yeah, sure, I'll add one other thing. It's the, this is a challenge in virtually every plan, every policy document that we adopt as a community, right? The fact that we have identified action items in a policy document, I think, is actually progress versus the past, where there's been a mix of things that maybe seem like action items and things that seem like policies. So it's actually really good, and I don't want to get too hung up on trying to prioritize action items within the document itself, because as it's a natural thing, I think, in any community that the action items are going to end up being sorted out based on availability of resources and all those kinds of things. And so none of us want a plan that sits on a shelf. And I think what I'm hearing the commission saying, and what I'm hearing Commissioner Borowski's concerns are, is that this is a really big and important component to the plan. The potential consequences of adopting this component without the support of these other actions that go along with it has some risks for the livability of the community and for other aspects. And so what you're trying to emphasize, I think, in somehow communicating either through the plan or to council, who may be directing the work to get this stuff done, and of course staff is going to do that too, is to say, hey, let's put a flag on this and say these are high priority items. And I think what we're struggling to do is find a way to do that that's most efficient and most clear, right? And so what I would hope we can do is
We have 2 ideas.
We do? Awesome.
We already do.
Good. And so
Yep.
that's one that involves the plan. There may be other ideas out there that just involve crafting a message from the Planning Commission to the council about prioritization of that doesn't require us to make alterations to the plan.
So let me, Catherine.
Well, so one of the things, so you could add a number 26 as a recommended revision, make revisions 22 through 25 standalone action items in a separate category in the system-wide, under system-wide. That could be a recommended 26
Or 25A.
or 20.
Yeah, pagination would come later.
Yes. Everything would have to get renumbered, but you added as a specific revision that you are, that your recommendation of this is contingent upon, is part of your recommendation of this is making those 4 standalone action items not within the broad category of potential action items.
Commissioner Nicolao.
I think at this point, and sure, I think that's a great recommendation. Can we just have a list of recommendations to send to council on this one, and really, I think, because we do want to get this off our table and moved on to them.
We're getting a motion at the end, so this is an important discussion in terms of us moving forward unless we want to keep it unresolved.
Okay.
Yeah,
It would be nice if it could just be a numbered list of recommendations and let them pursue from there.
that's exactly where we're headed
Great.
towards. Great. Commissioner Jaworski?
I don't support that, because what it's doing, it's burying our recommendation under things that are labeled potential actions, and it's a number 26 out of all of this. I favor taking them separately and putting them, like you initially stated, as action items, and that's what we're recommending. I don't have to have a number 26 to
Isn't that what you were
recommend it.
saying?
It's
Yeah,
in the
that's what
plan.
she was
I
saying.
think that's what you're saying. This is
These-
just the
these are
memo
revision
to-
items.
We're going to revise the plan to reflect this memo, and the council's going to see a new draft TSP. So those actions would be at the top, would be at the beginning of the
As
system-wide.
action
So-
items, not potential.
What I think I hear you saying is, you want to recommend 23 as, add the following action, add the following action, add the following action.
If this isn't in the plan, how it's listed, the 22, 23, 24, 25.
Right.
Right. I'm just saying that those particular items, I liked what you first said,
Right.
where they would have potential actions, and then under would be actions, and there would be those four.
That's
Should be
exactly.
above.
That's what she's
So
saying.
that's exactly.
I want to make sure
Yeah.
she's saying that, because she's now saying add a 26.
It is adding a
Just to your
26.
memo.
So
She's just
just the
talking about-
26 is just so your intent is clear.
Yeah.
The end result is the same.
Right.
All I was trying to do was add, the 26 was just trying to encapsulate the conversation that I heard there. That's all. Because all we're going to do with these, let's say you adopt this packet of 34, right, as part of your recommendation, that's going to get incorporated into this, and so that the next draft of the TSP that the council sees, that the council gets, will incorporate all your changes. So I was just trying to make your intent crystal clear.
Okay, well, yeah, as long,
This is our direction.
I really support them being separate as you
Absolutely.
indicated in the plan.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to take an advantage right now to do a straw poll vote of all those in favor of adding a revision item number 26 to state.
25A.
25A would be better.
I think it's actually got to be
You could just-
26.
I mean, it would be
25
35.
Yeah, it would be 35. I mean,
Yeah,
all it
yeah,
would
that's
be-
a good
yeah,
point.
And it doesn't need to be. a
It doesn't
number,
need to be,
just-
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyways, whatever number it is, what does it say?
It would be make recommended action items 22 through 25 standalone action items in a separate category under system-wide.
Okay, all those in favor of adding that? All those opposed? Okay, it was 5-1.
I never had a chance to ask my question regarding
Oh,
25.
shoot, okay.
That's why I voted against.
Yeah, sorry, well, go ahead and ask it. Next time, you definitely chime in.
Okay,
Thought we were
well,
done.
sometimes I feel like I chime in too
forgot.
often, and I
No,
don't
no,
want to.
no. Go for it, go for it.
I'm not sure I understand what 25 is.
You know where this one came from?
This was another one that was trying to, again, get at some of the concerns that were raised. This was actually brought up by Julia.
Well, to tell you frankly, I think there's some redundancy between 22 and 25.
I don't
And I don't
understand
know
it.
that, I mean, I think that 25 is already sort of embedded in 22. That we could probably do away with 25.
I mean,
maybe we-
21.
No,
No, 22.
22.
Because it says, expand what does it say? Expand the measurement of a proposed development's traffic impact beyond the level of service. I think the idea with 25 was to more broadly, just looking at how we measure, how we gauge how our system's working, look at developing some tools that we can use as a city that go beyond.
It's like,
I think 25 actually should probably just be a potential, if we're going to keep it, that maybe makes sense just to keep it as a potential action. It's just basically saying, like, look at our toolbox of how we measure traffic as a city, just for all our purposes, and look at using other tools
I was
besides
just-
LOS, so that,
Rob, I just wasn't clear what
Right.
it meant there.
is that consistent, kind of what maybe Julia was coming from, or?
I'm not clear.
Okay, you
She
were-
added that.
right.
Because I just had, it feels like the city almost, maybe these already exist, but we're trying to come up with a way of studying and determining what to do based on some kind of measure that does not currently exist, or at least I haven't heard it
we don't-
brought to this table yet.
Some in
That
our
incorporates and understands all transport modes and the
this is
delays
even-
involved.
I mean, this is even looking at vehicle, how intersections are working there, and then from a more sophisticated perspective than just looking at the delay. So like looking at queues or different. So
Yeah,
I don't,
good.
I think my suggestion would be not to go back and take this out of the act.
I mean, we're gonna
Keep it-
redo the
keep it
straw poll vote.
potential, and it's just more of an idea action,
So say that again, Rob, please.
Keep this one as a potential action is my suggestion.
Yeah, keep it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Randall?
I think I would suggest either keeping it as a potential action or even just deleting it completely, because I do think it is somewhat redundant with what we've got in 22 and
Well, you
23.
could include part of, change what you say in 22 to incorporate that and delete it.
I mean, I can go either way.
Right, I mean, I could live, same for me, so, not
Okay.
that matters, but just,
Commissioner Borowski, did you have something to say? No. Okay, so let's try this again. I'm just going to, and thank you for your comment. I'm going to, for now, leave out 25. We're just going to leave it because it's there. And I'm going to say, how many of those in favor of adding another revision item, whatever is the best categorization of that number? 22, 23, and 24. Can you state what that additional one would actually say?
Okay, so it would make revisions 22, 23, and 24 standalone action items in a separate category in the system-wide.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. So I'd like to quickly make sure, I don't want to make sure that I cut anybody off. I have been super efficient, and I'll tell you why. And actually, because we have very limited time on this, and we got to really go fast the next meeting. So category number 3, we have now completed it. I just want to get a straw poll vote. All those in favor of basically
Can I ask
approving?
a question first?
Yes.
Where did we leave 25? Did we leave 25 as a potential?
We have potential.
Okay.
Yeah, does that work?
Just wanted to clarify.
Okay. So we're going to approve all the revisions in category 3. We're going to add a number as determined by staff that says make number 22, 23, 24. Catherine, what she said last time, do we need to repeat it? Okay. With adding that, all those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, that's 5 in favor, 1 opposed. Okay, so we have 3 minutes, and what I'll explain to you, I'm going to actually have staff. So we have 3 more categories. We have 1 meeting to address this, and we do not have a whole meeting. And this took us an entire meeting to do 3 categories, and we have 3 categories left. So, I know this is an important document, obviously, so we want to spend time on it, but we've got a schedule. So I'm not quite sure what to do with that, so staff, I'm going to actually open it up to you to talk about that a bit. I mean, we can try it next meeting, what happens, yeah.
So I can say that they get easier and less controversial as we go down. DLCD, the olive page, so starting at the revisions to respond to DLCD comments, these were done solely and entirely in response to the comments we received from DLCD staff. They weren't, that was submitted during the public comment. So that was nothing that we heard directly from all of you, except for what we heard was make sure you're responsive to DLCD staff. So those are why those are there. It's actually a lot of words and very, very little substance, because they asked us to kind of rejigger our volumes. So
Okay, stay there 1 second. Let me ask, did anybody have, I just want to get an understanding for the next time. Did anybody have items for that section?
I had a very small one.
Okay, very
I
small.
mean, we could almost cover it right
Why
now.
don't we try to, and let's get through that category. Okay.
It's on number 31. And it reads, add the following
Oh, you know what?
statement.
That's in the next
That's the
category.
next
Who
category.
is it?
yeah, it
Okay,
drops it
I'm
down to
sorry.
the revision.
So we're in this category. I'm just going to, with our 2 minutes. So category number 4, all those in favor of accepting the revisions as proposed? It's unanimous. So category 4, now go to category 5. So category 5, we have 1 small item with Commissioner Borowski. Does anybody else have any items in category 5? Okay, let's try to do Commissioner Borowski.
Again, it's number 31, and the sentence says, prior to commencing a capital transportation project, the city almost always reaches out and engages the neighborhood. I just didn't feel comfortable with almost always.
most, I mean, we could say, I mean, there's certain projects where, say, we're making a
I
change to a
understand that.
traffic signal or something like that, where I mean,
No,
I was trying to be completely honest about it, and so.
That's policy.
I don't know, it didn't ring well in my ear. That's why I brought it up.
Usually, would that be better than almost always?
Yeah, usually it's probably better than almost always.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, it didn't read well to me,
Okay.
because that,
But truthful is good, I know, and.
It is, it's great.
We could say,
It's good.
in all
It's
honesty.
specific enough where we know, okay, we don't always do it, but we do it, yeah.
city-
do our best to reach out.
Yeah,
So what I'm going
How
to
about
do
that?
is,
I like it.
Do our best to reach out.
yeah.
okay, do our best to reach out.
Okay with that, Rob?
City, I'd say we say city staff do their best to reach out. I mean, just trying to be grammatically.
Yeah,
correct.
yeah, just something, it didn't, like I said, it sounded like, if we want to.
Okay, so Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, you're moving quick. I had a question on 28, since you were jumping to the
Okay,
next item.
okay, perfect.
I have the same concern here, that this is a potential action. This is really impacting neighborhoods, and we hear a lot about neighborhoods. And I don't understand why something as critical as what's being said here is a potential action.
Yeah. I mean, this one maybe should be somewhere else in the plan. I just couldn't figure out where that was, but it kind of feels like it ought to be maybe somewhere, I don't know, if under chapter, maybe somewhere under chapter 4.
Or a
Or
policy.
under implementation, I don't know, or you're saying make it a policy?
Right, it doesn't sound to me like a potential action item. There's
No, it
nothing to
sounds
do.
like
It's
something-
just a,
It should be just a policy, you're
Okay,
going to
well, we
do
can,
that. It doesn't cause any
Sure.
additional work
Yeah, we
until
could
you have
just
a
say,
project.
that's fine, we can make it a policy, I guess. I mean,
Okay.
so, and if I can just add something generally, since we're going to be coming back to you at your next meeting, I'm going to you'll get a clean document that will reflect your straw polls. So for example, on the one we just did with adding the make these standalone, you'll see add the following as a standalone action item. So it'll be reflective of everything you've said and discussed so you'll have a cleaner document to make a motion on.
Okay,
Next
so
one.
can I, right now, we're 2 minutes over. Do you mind staying for another 3 minutes while we close this up? Okay, thank you. So I would like to see how many are in favor for category number 5, revision addressing neighborhood livability. We are going to accept revision items 29, 30. We're going to suggest 28, make it a policy, and number 31, the city staff do their best to reach out to and engage the community.
That's what I.
Rewording.
Yeah, rewording. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, I just want to get a vote here. Additional revisions. How many people have conversations about that? 2 people. And are these quick or are these not quick? If they're not quick, let's wait.
I'm not sure they're quick.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
mine's
wait.
not quick either.
Okay, so we've got 5 categories done. We have 1 category left. Thank you. Woo!
One more comment, and this is just for this process going forward. When I was going through these, I don't know if it's possible, but it would have been really helpful if you had referenced what page those were on.
Okay.
I apologize.
because
We originally did that, but it's different online than it is if someone's looking at their book.
Yeah.
So if we said,
But maybe for in our AIS, I don't know.
and if we said
it was
in
just-
your book.
It was just difficult.
I
to-
apologize, yes.
So before we
Especially on an
totally
airplane, flipping
close
back.
everything, I just want to get a show of hands. I would like to proceed at next meeting, start with category 6. We're not going to reopen other categories. Okay, perfect, so we can be efficient. We'll start there. Okay, and staff, did you have any quick items in terms of agenda item 3? Any?
Yeah, just,
Staff retreat.
I think we've heard from everybody about the Planning Commission retreat on the 13th, Tuesday the 13th. And I think Commissioner Jaworski, I'm not sure if I got confirmation that you are okay with a 12 noon to 5 p.m. retreat on that day.
I'm okay with that day.
Okay.
I did want to get back and ask, has the agenda been shortened? Because we went from a full day to half a day.
Yeah, the agenda's been We've tweaked it a little bit. We've tried to keep all the substantive conversations in there. And I'll be sending that out this afternoon. I've asked for comments from staff today, so y'all can take a look and let me know if there's other things that you want to do with that agenda. But just so folks know, that would be 12 to 5 if you're able to go and everybody's able to go.
And is lunch included? Just remind
Lunch
me.
is included, so first thing we'll do is have lunch, and we'll have part of the presentation during lunch, so we'll be efficient with our time.
Right over here.
And it'll be in the Chinook room of the Woolworth Building, second floor.
Okay. So I want to thank you all for being persevering through very tight facilitation. And I hope everybody, I just want to make sure people's voices are heard, so know that it's not like it's closed. Try to type it. Okay, thanks for staying 5 minutes late. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.